Have you ever noticed that when you spend time with your family, you naturally slip into a role without consciously choosing to do so? You might even catch yourself regressing, again, without this actually being a conscious choice. It seems that no matter how smart, well put together, high functioning we may be in every other area of our life, when we're actually exposed to our family of origin, it's as if there's this subconscious, very powerful magnetic pull that causes us to slip right back into the person we were as children. And the more dysfunctional the family we grew up in, the more likely this is to be the case. Experts estimate that 85 to 95% of us grew up in what's considered to be less than nurturing homes. In other words, some level of family dysfunction. Now, some of us grew up in more severe levels of neglect, trauma, abuse, family dysfunction, right? And in order to survive the sick family system that we found ourselves in, we either took on or were assigned a survival role. Now, none of this is conscious, but it happens nonetheless. So this survival role that we were either assigned or took on is really who we had to be in order to survive the toxic, shame-based, dysfunctional family system that we found ourselves in, that we were vulnerable to, powerless to change, and powerless to leave. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Dysfunctional family survival roles, what they are and how they operate. Hey friends, Tamie M, Joyce here, Empowerment Life Coach, and today I want to talk to you about dysfunctional family survival roles. But before I start this video, I want to quickly announce that a few spots have opened up for the free one-to-one consult with me for the Freedom class to see if we'd be a good fit for working together. So if that's of interest to you, be sure to stick around till the end of the video to find out the details on that. And with that, let's get started. For the best advice on how to heal and recover from codependency and narcissistic abuse, subscribe to my channel and hit that bell to be sure to be notified when I post new videos throughout the week. So let's talk about dysfunctional family survival roles. Now, the truth is, if you're a human being living on planet Earth, unless you're in deep, deep, deep denial or you're the vast minority, you've probably noticed that the vast majority of us have come from some level of dysfunction, some level of messed up. Most families are sick to some degree. Sad to say, but true. Welcome to being a human being on planet Earth. It just is what it is. But like everything else, these are not necessarily black or white issues. Everything else that I talk about on this channel anyway, we are more often than not talking about a spectrum, a sliding scale, right? And the more severely dysfunctional the family that you grew up in, the more likely it is that you either took on or were assigned a dysfunctional family survival role. So there are 5 survival roles that you will find in particular in a highly dysfunctional family. The first is the chief enabler. Next, we have the hero or golden child. Then we have the lost child, often, not always, the middle child. Then we have the mascot or joker. And last but not least, my personal favorite, because this was, my assigned role, the family scapegoat. Those are the 5 roles that you'll typically find people fall into in a sick family system, in a dysfunctional family unit. So let's break each one down. So number 1, the chief enabler. This is typically the spouse or significant other. This is the person who enables, who allows, who protects all of the dysfunctional, destructive behavior, in particular with the significant other. So like take your classic codependent, alcoholic, parents, marriage, that partnership. The codependent will enable the alcoholic or the drug addict. The codependent mother who has the active alcoholic or, otherwise highly destructive or drug addicted child will enable, protect, defend, rescue, save, coddle, ensure that there are soft landings, right? Like this is the person who gets in there and makes sure everything is okay. Now, I was raised by this person. I was raised by my paternal grandmother, who was, without question, as much as she was a good woman with a heart of absolute gold. And I thank my lucky stars for landing in her home relative to the other options where I could have landed. Thank God I landed with her. The truth is, she was, without question, the chief enabler in our family. And as a result, a lot of things went on that ought not to have gone on throughout my life as a child, as a teen, and even into my 20s, until I became old enough and ultimately empowered enough to separate myself from the sick family unit and all of the nonsense, right? Which was a progressive thing. These things don't happen necessarily in one foul swoop, but for a very long time, the chief enabler turned a blind eye, lived in such deep denial that she missed an awful lot of things. She didn't see a lot of things that, in my opinion, looking back in retrospect, especially when I was a kid, she should have seen. So concerned with winning the approval of everyone else. Like, what this really boils down to, in my opinion, it's runaway low self-esteem. It's untreated codependency. And, I know this probably sounds harsh when we consider who the chief enabler is in our family. Often, again, it's thank goodness for these people in some respects, but the dysfunctional family system is such that, man, do they drop the ball. Man, do they make a lot of mistakes. Man, do they enable a lot of sickness, dysfunction, and abuse to go on, right? So in my opinion, it really fundamentally, in particular with the grandmother who raised me, boiled down to a case of untreated codependency, someone who is desperately in need of codependency recovery, who did not have it. It was not a thing that, was even an option available to her when she was growing up, that's for sure. And, just rampant runaway low self-esteem. In other words, really so concerned about the approval of everybody else, including her adult children, by the way, so wrapped up in winning their approval that she would enable all kinds of neglect, abandonment, abuse, targeting, scapegoating. And I was victim to much of that. So, a woman really doing the best she could with the resources she had, who just had a lifetime of, enabling behavior under her belt, in my opinion, as I understand it, by the time I came along, long before I was around, as I understand it, she was enabling the alcoholic grandfather who passed away when I was 5. So I have very, very few memories of this man. But, suffice to say, 25 years with a chronic alcoholic who beat her and probably the children rather severely. And she stayed. She enabled this behavior. Now, typically, these people will do everything except what would actually work. This is what is classic of the chief enabler in the family. They do everything except what would work. For example, calling the abusive, the destructive, the alcoholic, the addict, the tyrant, the narcissist, the bully, calling them out on their behavior, right? That might actually work. They don't do that. Setting boundaries and backing them up, they don't actually do that. Leaving the dysfunctional situation, they don't do that. They do everything else. Lots of rescuing and protecting and yada, yada, except what would actually work, unfortunately. Now, the thing about this enabling behavior is it will typically continue. As I said, my grandmother, for an example, had a lifetime of this behavior under her belt long before I came along, right? So this continues. This behavior will continue out of habit, and it won't actually change until something catastrophic happens. It takes something major, great, big, huge. And unfortunately, sometimes that's death in the family. Not always, but sometimes. It has to be something catastrophic to shock them out of their deep denial, their deep unconsciousness, and get them moving forward. In the case of my grandparents, as I understand it, the story that I have, what finally caused my grandmother to leave after 25 years with a chronic alcoholic who beat her violently, regularly, sometimes to the point of being hospitalized. It was that bad. What happened was a fight broke out with my father when my mother was carrying me. It was bad enough that someone's fist went through a plate glass window, blood was everywhere, the cops were called. My mother made a comment to my grandmother that certainly woke her up out of her deep sleep in that moment about why it was that she might be sticking around. And my grandmother finally realized that if she didn't do something, in other words, leave, someone was going to die. Someone was going to die. 25 years of that kind of dysfunction, that kind of insanity. And finally, it was catastrophic enough. There was enough blood, there was enough said, the police were on the scene, certainly not for the first time, but there was a moment of clarity, as they would say in 12-step recovery, and she left. So with chief enablers, it often takes, if you're lucky, something catastrophic before they will actually be moved out of that chief enabling position. Next, we have the hero, or the family golden child. Now, this person often, not always, is the firstborn or the oldest child, right? Again, often, not always. They see and hear all the family dysfunction, the chaos, the drama, the insanity, all the cuckoo land stuff, and they take responsibility for making it all right by becoming overachievers, by behaving perfectly, by becoming overly responsible, growing up too fast, being young little adults in young little bodies, and growing up to be literally the family hero or the family golden child, again, by overachieving, overcompensating for the family dysfunction. They'll also often form an alliance with more functional members of the extended family. They take on or are assigned the role of making it all look real good, keeping up the facade, bringing home, in our what I consider to be, the immediate family. I was the oldest grandchild, but actually more like, the youngest child, number 6. There were 5 above me, right? Because I was raised by my grandmother. And, the hero in that immediate family went off to Vietnam, became, a decorated United States Marine, for a certain period of time, certainly would have been looked upon as the more successful, more functional person in the family. Now, left untreated, all of these issues get worse, not better over time. So it's amazing when, decades pass and you look back and you have a whole lot more information, things are not always what they appear, right? But nonetheless, in the family unit, the hero or golden child is the one who's going to have it all together. There's actually a few from my particular family experience that I could think of, depending on which particular unit. I have a half sibling older than me. It all looks real good on the outside, all perfect, right? Worked really, really hard to be a success, be seen as a success. And this is a role, again, that either is taken on or is assigned to overcompensate for what is lacking in terms of a functional family system. Some people think that the role of the hero or the golden child, like, oh, they have it easy or so much easier there, then if you compared to some of the other survival rules that we're going to get to. Not necessarily the case. The burden of responsibility, the pressure that this individual bears and carries as a result of, taking on or being assigned this role in a dysfunctional family system is actually quite a heavy burden to carry. There's a lot that goes along with that. So if you're sitting back thinking about the golden children or the heroes in your own family, and it seems like they had it so good because they got all the accolades, especially if you had narcissistic parents, right? They got all the accolades, they got all the applause. It seemed like everything they touched turned to gold, etc. There's an awful lot of extra that comes along with that role that is quite the burden that I think a lot of people don't recognize that these people have to carry. And number 3 is the lost child. And to me, this is one of the saddest cases. The lost child often, not always, is the middle child. This is the one who really kind of gets lost, forgotten about, pushed aside in all the family chaos, all the family dysfunction, literally withdraws and becomes quite isolated emotionally, psychologically, and even physically. In my own family, immediate family unit that I had the wonderful joy of growing up in. When I think about the person who would fall into this category, there's a couple. One of them is one of the older, actually an uncle, and also, a half brother. Both of them would fall into the category of the lost child based on the family dysfunction that they were exposed to, right? People doing the best they can with what they had. And unfortunately, those resources were like real freaking limited. So, in the case of the elder, I didn't even know what this man's voice sounded like until I was in my teens, quite frankly. He would show up at family functions and sit in the corner and basically not say a word or whisper quietly to my father. And it's not to say that that was because he was weak in any way, quite the contrary, but, certainly was the individual who was withdrawn from, he wasn't right in the center of it all, that's for sure, withdrawn and isolated on many levels, in my opinion, as I have, learned all that I've learned in my recovery journey and looked back over, the dysfunctional family dynamics. That was definitely the case. Again, I didn't even know what the man's voice sounded like until I was in my teens. And I'm pretty sure most Sundays he was there for Sunday dinner. That was a regular thing. So, this is the individual who really just, has to, for their own means of survival, separate themselves to a large degree. Part of that is probably because there's so much chaos, so much drama going on, and they simply become overwhelmed at a very young age by all of it. In particular, if we're talking about the middle child, right? And this individual, if I, try to hallucinate as to what it might have been like when he was a little boy, the likelihood that he would have been overwhelmed by rough and tough older siblings who, there might not have been any protection or boundaries or, that sort of thing, healthy, functional family system in place. And then you add to it the rest of the chaos, the violence, all the other crazy dysfunctional insanity. No freaking wonder, as an adult, right up into adulthood, there was maintained, and as I understand it, to this day, still maintained a certain level of withdrawal from the family system. That's a survival strategy. That's really, really, really sad. These are, this particular role is one of the roles that really hurts my heart when you consider what has to happen to a child for them to either take on or be assigned the role of the lost child. It's heartbreaking. Now, comment below and tell me whether or not you recognize any of these roles in your own family of origin to this point. And if so, can you have a little more compassion for them now that you understand these dynamics a little bit better? Number 4, the mascot or family joker. In many cases, this is the youngest person in the family. This person likes to clown around a lot, you know, the typical class clown, likes to joke around, make light of everything, really in an attempt to relieve the family tension, you know, when you're, you know, if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, you can walk into a room and cut the tension with a knife, right? Often it's just a look or a glare from, you know, the people in authority, whoever that happens to be, the bullies in the room. Often that's all it takes, right? Someone's getting the silent treatment, all the passive aggressive bullshit that goes on, right? Someone's in the corner, deeply, deeply wounded. Someone else is raging. There's tension. So the youngest will either take on or be assigned the role of being the class clown, the mascot, the joker, the one who walks in and makes light of everything and lightens the air, works real hard, takes it on like it's their job, works real hard to lighten the tension that is going on inside of the home. And they carry this out into adult life. When I think about the mascots or, you know, family jokers that I have known in my life, like even in adult life, these are people who sadly have to operate on a very superficial level. Very, very superficial level. They cannot have deep, meaningful conversation because it tends to trigger deeply buried pain and shame. So you can only deal with these people on a superficial level, or rather they can only deal on a superficial level. They can't go there in terms of deep, meaningful conversation. And, you know, for anyone who wants to have real intimacy, this can be really frustrating to be dealing with someone who's operating behind a wall, you know, this facade of ha ha, everything's funny, even when it's not. And when you try to adult with an individual like this, you can't. Very, very sad for them and anyone who's trying to have an intimate connection with them. Now, last but not least, the family scapegoat. My personal favorite, quite frankly, because this was the role that I was assigned at a very, very young age. Now, the family scapegoat is the individual whom it's as if there is this unconscious agreement within the family that it's okay to target this one individual. So this is the individual who grows up feeling like the family punching bag, the family dumping ground, the family garbage bin. This is the person in particular, when we're talking about dysfunctional families, if you've grown up in a family where there has been narcissistic abuse, one or both of the parents or authority figures or, you know, any number of the adults, in my case, landed on the spectrum of destructive narcissism to some degree, whether that was very high-end, pathological, malignant, you know, all the way to sociopathy, or just, you know, your garden variety, dry drunk narcissist, chronic alcoholic narcissist, like somewhere on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, right? So if you grew up in that type of a family unit and you were assigned the role of family scapegoat, what that really means is you were the target for all of their projected garbage. We are literally the targets for their unresolved issues, unresolved pain, unresolved trauma, all of their hidden shadow, all of their, you know, neurosis that they have going on. Now, it sounds, you know, very dramatic, but the reality is it's freaking true. It happened in my own life, and it has happened in the lives of countless people that I have spoken to, clients and otherwise. This is a very real phenomenon. The more sick and dysfunctional and narcissistic your family unit, the more likely it is that they're not even the more likely, it is almost guaranteed, there has to be a family scapegoat, because these sick, deeply unconscious, deeply wounded, traumatized human beings need a place to project their stuff. They have to unload it, right? Now, this calls to mind bullying, manipulation, being lied about, being lied to, people turning a blind eye when predators are doing their thing, whether that's physical abuse, sexual abuse. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, you're wrong, you're bad, it's never good enough. Like, you literally become the family dumping ground, the family garbage bin, and you grow up on the receiving end of all of this projected nonsense. Thank God, in my healing and recovery journey, and I wish this for anyone who relates to this, that you find this for yourself as well. Thank God I came to a place of being properly educated in my healing and recovery, on my healing and recovery path, getting the information, getting the treatment, getting the validation, getting the education that I needed to understand what the hell it was that happened to me. Because the reality is, if you are the family scapegoat, it's coming at you from all kinds of levels. So you're being abused on a number of levels, starting at a very young age, typically. And further, you're being blamed for the abuse, right? So you're not just being abused, you're being blamed for the abuse. And that type of emotional and psychological and spiritual abuse, that type of gaslighting, the kind of stuff that goes on in that type of a family dynamic is so damaging. It can take a lifetime to recover from. It really can. Like, if you think that the effects of being the family scapegoat are going to go away naturally with time, I'm here to tell you that time heals nothing. Time heals nothing. I think it was Dr. Phil, of all people, to quote. I think it was Dr. Phil, and with all due respect, but I think it was Dr. Phil who said, time heals nothing. It's what you do with that time. And truer words were never spoke, right? So if you identify as having been the family scapegoat, understand that that was your role. And although you have been victimized, you do not have to live the rest of your life as a victim. The truth is, yes, we have been victimized, but we do not have to live the rest of our lives as victims. We can heal, recover, become fully free, fully empowered, and get on a path of living our best life as our best selves. I am living proof of that. I work with clients day in and day out who are also living proof of that. There's a lot to be said about having grown up as the family scapegoat. So much so, I think I'm going to start a series on it here on my YouTube channel. So if you identify, absolutely be sure to subscribe, because I will be posting more and more around this particular subject. But know that, the person who is assigned this role in a narcissistic family, for sure, at the very least, like in a narcissistic family, the person who is assigned this role isn't assigned this role for nothing. It isn't for nothing that we were assigned this role. We have to remember that when we're having these conversations, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, right? So we can never forget the implications of spirituality, of our own spiritual path, growth, evolution, and spiritual warfare. It all plays a part in this. And I personally believe, in particular, when we're talking about a narcissistic family unit and the individual who is assigned the role of family scapegoat, many, many, many light workers on this planet grew up going through that particular soul walk, that journey, that path, right? It's not the weakest one that gets assigned that role, but more often the strongest one. It's not the one with the dimmest light or the least amount of power that gets assigned that role by the narcissistic individuals who are in a position of power while we're little. It's the one who actually carries the most personal power, even as an itty bitty child. It's the one who carries the most light. Now, again, a lot of this is not conscious. A lot of this is happening on a subconscious level on both sides of this aisle. But nonetheless, I have observed more often than not, it's the one who carries the most light, the one who is here to do the most powerful work individually and for impact collectively. It is the one who is most likely to fight back and rebel against the sick family system. It's the one who's most likely who would have the most potential to shine so bright that the narcissistic family can't have that now. We can't have someone who would, likely outshine us. That would not do when we're talking about people who land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, right? These are people who are pathologically envious, pathologically insecure, have a shit ton of unresolved dark shadow stuff that they're dragging around that they have to project onto their favorite target, and the scapegoat happens to be their favorite chosen target, right? So they can't have someone who could potentially outshine them. It's, they're the ones that, that's the individual that the narcissistic family members are going to go after time and time and time and time and time again, until we get to a place where we say no more. I do not live my life as the family scapegoat anymore. It has been many, 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 many years since I would qualify in terms of being affected in that fashion. Now, smear campaigns may very well, continue to go on and that sort of thing. It doesn't affect me. I have removed myself so that I could heal myself and empower myself to live out my mission and my purpose on this planet. So, the good news is, the bad news is, if you grew up as the family scapegoat, it is an excruciatingly painful, unbelievably traumatic, absolutely victimizing path to have had to travel. The good news is what healing and recovery can do for you and who you can become in terms of a force for good in your own life and the lives of others, putting a dent in the darkness that is the reality here on planet Earth today more than ever. Let me tell you, I see it day in and day out. So, my friends, I hope you got some value out of this today. Those are the 5 dysfunctional family survival rules that we typically see in dysfunctional families. Again, if you identify with the family scapegoat, there's going to be more coming. So be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, hit that bell, share it with your friends. And thank you for taking the time to tune in and watch. And as I said at the top of the video, I have a few spots open for the free one-to-one consult with me for the Freedom class to find out if we're a good fit for working together. So if that's of interest to you, there's a link in the comments below where you can access my calendar directly and apply to see if you qualify for a free call with me. We can get on the phone, have a conversation. I can give you all the details to my 8-week transformational coaching program, the Freedom class. We help people heal and recover from codependency and narcissistic abuse through this 8-week transformational coaching program. And when I say we, predominantly me, but I have a team behind me that helps me get all the things done. So here at Tamie M Coaching, we love what we do and we're having tremendous success. So if you'd like to apply to see if you qualify for a free one-to-one consult with me, be sure to click the link in the description below. I'll also put a link in the description below to come and join us in Tamie M's Growth Zone, my free private Facebook community. On a weekly basis, I upload pre-recorded trainings. I do live trainings in there regularly. There's all kinds of free resources available to you. So if you would like to join us and interact with me more directly, come and join us in Tamie M's Growth Zone on Facebook. Again, I will put the link in the comments. And with that, I'm going to call it a wrap and leave you with this. Know your value. Know your value and unlock your freedom. Mwah. Much love. Bye for now.